When I walked out that door, I thought I was chasing freedom. I didn't look back. I didn't want to. I told myself that leaving was the first step toward becoming someone important, someone successful, someone the world would notice. But what I didn't know that morning was that I was walking away from everything that had ever truly loved me. There's a moment that plays in my head sometimes. My mother standing at the window, her hand pressed against the glass as I waved goodbye. I remember the look in her eyes. It wasn't anger. It wasn't sadness. It was something quieter. Something that said, "Please, don't forget us." I thought I never would. But time has a way of changing what the heart remembers. Hi there, and welcome to True Heart Voices. This is where every story comes from a place of real emotion. If you believe that stories can heal, that they can remind us of what truly matters, then you're in the right place. I'd love for you to subscribe, like, and share this video, not for the numbers, but so that someone out there who needs to hear this story will. Because maybe, just maybe, it'll help them find their way home too. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. I grew up in a small town in Oregon, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, and the grocery clerk remembers what kind of milk your dad drinks. Our house sat on a quiet street lined with old maple trees. Dad, Tom, was a man who spoke little, but carried warmth in every gesture. He could fix anything: broken chairs, tangled radios, even broken hearts. Mom, Diane, was the gentle center of our world. She made our home feel alive. The smell of fresh pie, the sound of her humming while she worked. Our lives were simple, but they were full. Every evening we sat around the dinner table. We didn't have much, but we had laughter, conversation, and love that filled the space between us. I was their only child. They gave me everything they could: patience, freedom, dreams. Maybe too much of it, because as I grew older, that same freedom made me restless. When I was 18, I decided I wanted to leave our little town. I wanted the noise, the lights, the rush of the city. I wanted to prove that I could build a life bigger than theirs. Looking back now, I realize how ungrateful that sounds. But at that age, dreams feel louder than gratitude. Mom tried to hide her sadness when I told her I was moving. She smiled, nodded, and said, "Just promise me you'll take care of yourself." Dad stood quietly behind her, his eyes soft but heavy. He didn't say anything then, but I remember him hugging me longer than usual the day I left. He smelled of oil and coffee, and I didn't know that would be the last time I'd hold him without regret. Right, the city was everything I had imagined and everything I wasn't ready for. Skyscrapers that touched the clouds, streets that never slept, and people who moved too fast to notice you existed. At first, I loved it. I felt free, independent. I rented a small apartment, found an entry-level job, and began living the life I thought I wanted. Every night I'd call home, at least for the first few weeks. Mom's voice would light up when she answered. "Did you eat?" she'd ask. I'd roll my eyes and laugh. "Yes, Mom, I'm not 5 anymore." But deep down, her calls felt like a thread connecting me back to something real. Then one night, I missed her call. Then another. Then a week passed. And suddenly, that thread didn't feel so strong anymore. Time has a way of turning distance into silence. I got busy, or at least that's what I told myself. There was always another project, another deadline, another reason not to call. And when I did finally think of calling, the guilt was already there, so heavy it made me avoid it altogether. I sent messages on holidays. Quick, polite. "Happy birthday, Mom. Love you." But words without presence start to lose their meaning. Still, I told myself it was fine. They understood. They knew I was chasing my dreams. Years went by. I changed apartments, jobs, even my last name, after marrying a man who loved ambition more than he loved me. His name was Michael. We were the perfect couple on paper, two driven people building a life together in the city. But the truth is, we were strangers sharing a space, not a life. He didn't understand where I came from, and after a while, I stopped talking about it. It was easier to forget than to explain. When I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized myself anymore. I was successful, independent, and utterly alone. For an evening, I stood by the window, watching the rain slide down the glass, and I thought about my parents. I couldn't remember the last time I'd seen them. 3 years? Maybe 4. The thought hit me like cold water. Somewhere in that silence, I realized I had become a stranger to the people who had loved me most. I reached for my phone. My hands shook as I found Mom's number. But I didn't call. I couldn't. Because what if they were disappointed in me? What if they had stopped waiting? I put the phone down and whispered to myself, I'll call tomorrow. Tomorrow didn't come for a long time. When I think back to my childhood, everything feels softer. The light through the curtains, the laughter in the kitchen, even the way the air smelled after rain. Our town wasn't special by any standard, but to me it was a whole world. Every street had a story. Every neighbor held a memory. Mom used to say, a home is not made of walls, but of hands that hold you. I didn't understand that then. I do now. We lived in a small white house at the end of Maple Street, with a red mailbox that leaned a little to the left and a porch swing that creaked whenever you sat on it. Dad built that swing the year I turned 10. I remember sitting on it for hours, feeling the breeze brush my face while he worked in the garden. He wasn't a man of many words, but his silence had weight. He made you feel safe without saying anything at all. Sometimes when Mom came home tired from the library, he'd quietly start dinner himself. No speeches, no big gestures, just quiet care. Mom was the voice of our home, warm, patient, curious. She loved books, but more than that, she loved people's stories. Every night she'd sit by my bed and read a fairy tale, a letter from a friend, or sometimes just her thoughts. She'd say, "Stories are how we remember who we are, sweetheart." I used to roll my eyes, but those words stayed. Being an only child meant all their love and all their expectations were mine. Sometimes that felt like a gift, sometimes like a weight. Every test, every decision, every mistake, it mattered. When I was 16, I started dreaming of leaving our small town. I wanted more: city lights, big offices, success. I wanted a life where I didn't have to explain who I was. Mom called it ambition. Dad called it restlessness. Both were right. One evening I'll never forget. The air smelled like wood smoke, leaves covered the yard. We were folding laundry in the living room when Mom looked up and said, "You're growing up too fast." I guess that's the point, Mom. She smiled, but it was the kind of smile that hides worry. Then she whispered, "One day, you'll run so far you'll forget what you were running from." I didn't answer. I just folded another shirt. Dad and I were different. We didn't need many words. When we talked, it mattered. He'd take me fishing on weekends. We'd sit there in silence, the water still, the sun soft. And he'd say, "Stillness isn't empty. It's full of answers." I laughed then. Now, I understand. Graduation came. Fairy lights in the yard, Mom's lemon cake, family laughter. It was simple, beautiful, and everything I thought I wanted to outgrow. That night, while everyone laughed, I stood beneath the stars and whispered softly, "There has to be more than this." And that whisper changed everything. The next months were full of plans and arguments. I got accepted into a business program in New York. To me, it felt like freedom. To them, it felt like loss. Mom tried to hide her tears, but I saw them in her eyes. Dad came to my room one evening, sat on the edge of my bed, and said quietly, "No matter how far you go, this will always be your home." I nodded, pretending to understand. I didn't. The morning I left was bright and clear, cruelly beautiful. Mom made breakfast none of us could eat. Dad loaded my suitcase into the car, slowly, like he was memorizing each motion. At the station, Mom hugged me tight, her heart racing against mine. "Call me when you land," she whispered. "I will," I promised. As the train moved, I looked back, saw them standing still, small in the distance. Mom lifted her hand. Dad just nodded. And then they were gone. That moment became the line that divided my life, before and after. Before, everything was warm, certain, full of love. After, everything was a search for something I couldn't name. In the beginning, I felt proud. I'd done what I said I would, independent, free. But freedom isn't the absence of love. It's the loneliness that asks if love will wait for you to return. I rented a tiny Brooklyn apartment, old, noisy, smelling of the cafe downstairs. I loved it. Every sound, every rush of people made me feel part of something bigger. I found a job at a marketing firm. The pay was small, the dream was big. Coffee cups, subway rides, endless lists. It was a blur. I told myself I was happy, and maybe I was, for a while. But slowly the cracks showed. The city that once thrilled me began to feel heavy. The noise that once energized me began to drain me. And each night, coming home to silence, I'd think of that creaking porch swing, the smell of Mom's pie, Dad's old radio. I called it nostalgia, but deep down, it was longing. You can leave home, but it never really leaves you. Months became years. Calls to my parents grew shorter, then rarer. I told myself they understood, but sometimes in the middle of the night, I woke with an ache I couldn't explain. Not for a place, but for the people who built my world with love. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking, what if they need me? And yet, I didn't pick up the phone, because when guilt grows, silence feels safer. Looking back, that's where the distance really began. Not the miles, but the quiet between our hearts. I kept saying I'd go back for Christmas, then next summer, then once work settles down. But life doesn't wait for your schedule, and family doesn't always stay the same while you're gone. That's how the story of how I left really began. Not with anger or rebellion, but with small, quiet choices that built walls one day at a time. And by the time I noticed, the walls were too high to see over. When I think about those years now, it feels like watching someone else's life, a movie that begins in color and slowly fades to gray. Success has a strange way of numbing you. It keeps you busy enough to forget what's missing, until the quiet moments remind you again. In New York, I climbed the ladder fast. Promotions came one after another. I bought better clothes, ate at expensive places, and smiled when people called me driven. I thought I was becoming the person I was meant to be. But there's a kind of silence that follows you when you leave love behind. It doesn't shout. It waits. The first big crack came on a Sunday afternoon. I had just come home from brunch with colleagues when my phone buzzed with Mom's name. I almost didn't answer. It had been weeks since we'd talked properly. When I picked up, her voice was gentle, a little tired. She told me Dad had slipped on the porch steps and hurt his leg. Nothing serious, she said, but he was resting now. I remember nodding even though she couldn't see me. "Oh, I hope he's okay," I said, already glancing at my emails. She hesitated before saying, "He keeps asking when you'll come visit." And just like that, I felt the old weight return. Guilt wrapped in love. I promised I'd try to come soon. But soon never came. Weeks turned into months again. Work got busier. My world became smaller. Deadlines, dinners, and sleepless nights. Sometimes I'd think about calling home, but I'd convince myself it was too late in the evening, or too early in the morning, or that I'd do it tomorrow. Tomorrow became a habit. Then one day, I got an envelope in the mail. Inside was a small photo. Mom and Dad standing in front of the house, smiling. They looked older. Their smiles were the same, but something behind them had changed. A quiet tiredness I didn't remember. On the back of the photo, Mom had written, "We miss you." The porch swing still creaks. "Love, Mom." I stared at it for a long time. Something inside me ached. That old, familiar ache that never really left. I placed the photo on my fridge with a magnet, thinking I'd call her that night, but by the time I got home from work, I was too tired, so I didn't. That night, I fell asleep staring at that photo, the edges curling slightly against the cool metal of the fridge door. It wasn't that I didn't love them. I did. But love is strange when you keep it at a distance. You start to believe it'll wait forever, that it'll always be there when you're ready. I didn't realize that love, like people, has its limits. Not because it stops caring, but because time changes how it breathes. Years passed. I turned 30, got a bigger apartment, a new promotion, more money, more recognition, more emptiness. I dated a man named Daniel for almost a year. He was kind and charming, but every time he asked about my family, I'd change the subject. It wasn't that I didn't want to talk about them. It was that talking about them reminded me how far I'd drifted. Daniel once said, "You have a good heart, Sarah, but you live like someone who's afraid to use it." I didn't respond. I didn't know how to. One winter, Mom called again. Her voice was weaker this time. She said Dad's health had been getting worse and she wanted me to come home for Christmas. I told her I couldn't. Work was crazy, I said. Deadlines, year-end projects. But she didn't argue. She just said, "Okay, honey. Maybe next time." I hung up and sat there, staring at my phone. I felt something twist inside me, like a quiet scream that couldn't find its way out, but I didn't call back. Christmas came and went. I spent it alone in my apartment, surrounded by half-eaten takeout and the glow of the city lights outside. I told myself I didn't mind, but deep down, I did. Everywhere I looked, people were together, laughing, cooking, sharing. I tried to drown the loneliness with work, but it stayed, like an unwelcome guest that refused to leave. That night, I dreamed of home, the porch swing, the soft light from the kitchen window, Mom's hands kneading dough, Dad's quiet hum. When I woke up, my face was wet with tears. I told myself it was just nostalgia. But it wasn't. It was love, unspoken, unresolved, waiting. I stead the day that changed everything. It was spring. The city was alive again after months of cold. I was at work, lost in meetings, when my phone started buzzing nonstop. When I finally checked it, 6 missed calls and 1 voicemail. It was short. A nurse from a hospital back home. My father had been admitted after a heart episode. They were trying to reach me. For a moment, I couldn't move. The room around me blurred, voices muffled, like I was underwater. Stillness isn't empty. It's full of answers. I left work without saying a word, booked the next flight home. The whole time my mind kept circling the same thought. Please, let me be on time. When I reached the hospital, Mom was sitting in the waiting area, hands clasped together, eyes red from crying. The moment she saw me, she stood up, but she didn't hug me right away. It was like she wasn't sure if she could. Then she whispered, "He's stable now. He asked about you." I walked into the room, and there he was, thinner, weaker, but still my dad. His eyes lit up when he saw me. He didn't say anything for a while, he just smiled. I held his hand, feeling how fragile it had become. And for the first time in years, I felt like a daughter again. The next few days were quiet. I stayed with Mom, helping around the house. It felt strange. Everything was the same, yet different. The swing still creaked, the clock still ticked in the hallway, but time had left its fingerprints on everything. Mom cooked like she used to, humming softly, but I could sense the distance. Not anger, not resentment, just the careful politeness that comes when love has been bruised. We didn't talk about the years I'd been gone. We didn't have to. The silence said enough. The night I sat on the porch alone. The sky was full of stars, the kind you never see in the city. Mom came out and sat beside me. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then she said quietly, "You've done well for yourself." I nodded, but I couldn't find the words to say that success had cost me something I didn't know how to get back. After a while, she said, "You know, your father never stopped fixing that swing. Even after the wood started to rot. He said he wanted it ready, just in case you came home." Her voice broke on the last words. I looked down, my chest tightening. I wanted to apologize, to say I was sorry for every missed call, every excuse, every selfish reason. But sometimes the guilt is so deep that words feel too small. So I just said, "I'm here now." She placed her hand over mine. That's all that matters. For a few weeks, things got better. Dad slowly recovered. Mom smiled more often. We ate dinner together, laughed a little, shared old stories. It felt like we were mending something fragile, stitching torn fabric with trembling hands. Every small moment felt precious. The sound of their laughter, the warmth of light across the kitchen table, the feeling of home I had forgotten. But deep inside, I knew time was short. And I was right. One morning, I woke to the sound of Mom crying in the hallway. Dad had passed away in his sleep. Peacefully, they said. But peacefully doesn't soften the shock of realizing you'll never hear someone's voice again. Everything after that was a blur. The funeral, the condolences, the endless quiet that filled the house after everyone left. I stayed for a few more weeks to help Mom, but something between us had shifted. We were closer, yet more fragile, like two people who had finally learned how much time can steal. When I returned to New York, my apartment felt empty in a way it never had before. The city noise couldn't hide the silence anymore. I tried to dive back into work, but my heart wasn't there. Every night, I'd find myself staring at the photo on my fridge, the one of Mom and Dad in front of the house. Except now, it was just Mom. That's when I realized the truth. I hadn't just walked away from home. I had walked away from time. And time doesn't give back what it takes. That was the rising conflict, not an argument, not a dramatic fight, just a slow, quiet separation built on excuses, pride, and the fear of facing love that never stopped waiting. And when love waits too long, it turns into memory. After Dad's passing, the world seemed quieter. Not because the city had changed, but because something inside me had. The noise that used to thrill me now just filled the silence he left behind. I tried to go on with life as usual. Emails, meetings, deadlines. People congratulated me on my new promotion, and I smiled like I was supposed to. But inside, I felt hollow, like I was performing someone else's life. At night, when the city went to sleep, I'd sit by my window and listen to the hum of traffic. Sometimes I'd close my eyes and pretend it was the sound of the porch swing creaking. That soft rhythm had once meant home. Now it only reminded me how far away I was. Mom called often in the months after the funeral. Her voice was steady, but I could hear the loneliness underneath. She'd tell me about her day, the garden, church meetings, the neighbor's new dog. She never complained. But every time she paused before hanging up, I felt the weight of what she didn't say. One evening, she mentioned she was thinking about selling the house. "It's too big for me alone," she said. I didn't know what to say. That house was more than wood and brick. It was where everything I was had begun. I told her maybe she should wait. She just replied softly, "Some things don't wait, honey. Sometimes they just end." That night I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, wondering when I had become the kind of daughter who only showed up when it was too late. The following weekend I went to visit her. It had been months since the funeral, and I told myself I was going to help her with the house. But deep down, I just wanted to see her face. When I arrived, the yard looked smaller than I remembered. The grass was overgrown and the porch swing was still. Mom opened the door before I even knocked. She looked older, thinner, paler, but her eyes still carried that same gentle warmth. We hugged for a long time. No words, just that quiet kind of comfort that comes when two people finally stop pretending. Over the next few days, I helped her clean the house, sort through old boxes, and make lists of things to sell or give away. Every drawer seemed to hold a piece of my childhood. Postcards, drawings, my old report cards, Dad's fishing hat. It was like walking through a museum of who we used to be. One afternoon, I found an old letter inside one of Mom's recipe books. The paper was folded neatly, yellowed with time. It was addressed to me, in Dad's handwriting. My hands trembled as I opened it. "Sarah, I don't know when you'll find this. Maybe when I'm gone. I just want you to know, you were never a disappointment. You didn't break our hearts by leaving. You just took them with you. Every night, when the porch light is on, that's me waiting for you to come home. Love, Dad." I must have read it 5 times before I realized I was crying. The tears came quietly, like they'd been waiting for years to be set free. That night, Mom and I sat on the porch together. The air was cool, the stars faint above the trees. I told her I'd found Dad's letter. She smiled sadly. "He wrote that the week you left," she said. "He used to sit out here every evening, watching the road. Said he didn't want you to come home to a dark porch." My heart broke in ways I didn't know it could. I looked at her, this woman who had given me everything, who had lost her husband, and still managed to keep her tenderness. "Mom," I whispered, "I should have been here. For him. For you." She reached over and took my hand. "You're here now," she said, just like before. But her voice was softer this time. Like she knew that time doesn't always give us second chances, only second looks. In the days that followed, I started helping her pack boxes for the move. It felt like dismantling a life, piece by piece. Every drawer closed was another goodbye. We sold the furniture, boxed up the dishes, and labeled everything that would go to charity. But when it came to Dad's old tools in the garage, Mom couldn't do it. She just stood there, holding one of his hammers, her eyes far away. "I keep expecting him to walk in," she said quietly. I didn't know what to say. Grief doesn't ask for answers, it just asks you to stay beside it. So I did. We didn't talk much after that. We just kept sorting side by side. Two women learning how to let go of what they loved. The day before I was supposed to leave, we went through the last few boxes in the living room. Mom found an old family photo, me at 8 years old, sitting between her and Dad on the porch steps. She stared at it for a long moment, then said, "We were happy, weren't we?" I nodded. We were. She smiled faintly. "Then that's enough." The next morning, when I was packing my bag, she came to my room holding something wrapped in cloth. "I want you to take this," she said. Inside was Dad's pocket watch, old, silver, with a small crack in the glass. "He carried it every day," she said. "He always said, 'Time is what we trade for love.'" I never really understood that until now. I held it in my palm, feeling its weight. It was more than metal. It was everything I had left of him. "I'll keep it safe," I whispered. She nodded, her eyes glistening. "I know you will." That afternoon, I left again, but it felt different this time. Not like escaping, but like leaving a part of my heart behind on purpose. When the bus pulled away, I looked out the window at Mom standing on the porch. The swing was still. The light was on. For a brief moment, I thought I saw Dad there too. Just a shadow of memory, smiling. I pressed my hand against the window glass and whispered, "I'm sorry." I'm coming back soon. Back in the city, everything looked the same, but nothing felt the same. Work, friends, noise, it all seemed distant, like background sound. The only thing that felt real was that pocket watch ticking softly on my nightstand. Weeks passed, and I called Mom more often. We talked about everything and nothing. Recipes, the weather, how the garden was doing. Her voice sounded lighter now, like the weight of silence had finally lifted a little. But there was something else, too. A fragility, like she was trying to sound strong for me. One evening, she didn't answer my call. I told myself she was probably resting, but the next morning my phone rang. Her neighbor, Mrs. Thompson. Her voice was trembling. "Sarah, your mother's been taken to the hospital." My hands went cold. Not again. Not so soon. I booked the first flight home. The entire journey felt like a nightmare I'd already lived. When I reached the hospital, the nurse led me to her room. Mom was there, pale but awake. Her eyes met mine, and she smiled, that same smile she'd worn every time I'd come back, no matter how long I'd been gone. "Hey, sweetheart," she said softly. "I guess your old mom gave you another scare." I sat by her side, holding her hand, feeling how small and fragile it had become. She told me it was nothing serious, just exhaustion and a little heart trouble. But I knew. I could see it in her eyes, the kind of tired that doesn't go away with rest. That night, I stayed in her room. She fell asleep with my hand in hers. I watched her chest rise and fall, the slow rhythm that once comforted me as a child. And I realized this was my last chance to say everything I had never said. So I whispered into the quiet room, "Mom, I'm sorry for every time I didn't call, for every holiday I missed, for every time I made you wonder if you'd raised me wrong. You didn't. You gave me everything, and I spent too many years thinking I had to earn what you'd already given. Love." She stirred slightly, but didn't wake. Maybe she heard me. Maybe she didn't. But I said it anyway, because some words aren't meant to be heard. They're meant to be released. The next morning, she woke up smiling. We talked about little things: breakfast, flowers, the nurse's cheerful attitude. Then she looked at me and said, "You should go back soon, sweetheart. Don't put your life on hold for me." I shook my head. "I'm not leaving this time." She smiled again, that same knowing smile, and said softly, "You already came back. That's enough." That was the turning point. Not the day I lost her, but the day I realized that love doesn't vanish with distance or time. It waits quietly, like a porch light that never goes out, hoping you'll find your way back before the night ends. Mom stayed in the hospital for a week. Every morning I brought her flowers. Daisies, her favorite. She'd smile, press them to her nose, and say, "They smell like sunshine." I started sleeping in the chair beside her bed. It wasn't comfortable, but I didn't care. Every night she'd drift off first, and I'd sit there, listening to the monitor beep softly, steady, like a heartbeat trying to remind me that time was still moving. A few days later, the doctor called me into the hallway. He spoke kindly, carefully. There was a softness in his eyes that made me understand before he even said the words. Her heart was weak. She'd been holding on for longer than anyone expected. There wasn't much they could do now, except keep her comfortable. I nodded, but I couldn't feel anything. The words just floated around me like smoke from a candle that had just gone out. When I walked back into her room, she looked up at me and smiled again. It was as if she already knew. Mothers always do. She reached out her hand, and I took it. "Don't cry, sweetheart," she whispered. "I'm not going anywhere. I'll always be where you can find me." That night, she asked me to help her write a few letters. One was to her sister, another to Mrs. Thompson, and one was to me. She asked me to mail the others later. Then she smiled and tucked the one addressed to me into the drawer beside her bed. "You'll read it when it's time," she said. I wanted to tell her no, that I couldn't stand the thought of when it's time. But I just nodded, because sometimes the only way to love someone is to accept the things you can't stop. The next morning she looked peaceful. The nurse said she'd slept through the night. I made her tea and told her about a funny thing I'd seen, a squirrel chasing a pigeon. She laughed softly, shaking her head. Then she took a deep breath. "Sarah, promise me something. Anything, Mom. When I'm gone, don't spend your life in guilt. Don't look back so much that you forget how to live." "I don't know if I can." "You will, because you came back. That's what matters." Later that day, I stepped out to grab a sandwich. When I came back, the room was quiet. Too quiet. I called her name, softly at first, then louder. But she didn't answer. The nurse came in, the doctor followed, and in that moment, as they spoke in low voices and the machines went still, I realized that the sound of her breathing had been the rhythm of my world, and it was gone. They let me stay with her for a while. The sun had just started setting outside the window, that warm golden light that makes everything look gentle. I sat beside her, holding her hand one last time. Her fingers were cool now, but her face looked calm. "You did it, Mom. You waited until I came home." And then the tears came, not loud, not desperate, just steady, like rain on a quiet roof. After the funeral, the house felt unbearably silent. Every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of the porch light reminded me of her. I couldn't bring myself to turn it off at night. For weeks, I wandered through the rooms, touching everything she had touched, her teacup, her books, her scarf on the chair. Each thing felt sacred, like a piece of her still lingered there. And then one evening, while sorting through her things, I found the letter she had written for me. The envelope had my name in her graceful handwriting. I sat on her bed and opened it carefully. "My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, it means I've finally gone home. Not far away, just somewhere quieter. I know you've spent a lot of your life chasing something. Maybe success, maybe peace. I don't blame you for leaving. The world calls us in different ways, but I want you to know something. You never stopped being my little girl. Not when you left, not when you stayed away, not even when you forgot to call. Love doesn't live in the things we do right. It lives in the space between our mistakes. Your father used to say, "Time is what we trade for love." But love itself, that's timeless. So live, sweetheart. Don't carry me like a weight. Carry me like a light. And when you miss me, look for the porch light. I'll be right there. Love always, Mom. I cried until I couldn't anymore. Not because of grief, but because of how deeply she understood me, even in goodbye. That night, I went outside and sat on the porch. The stars were faint, the air still. I turned on the light, just like she said. For the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. I felt home. Months passed. I decided to stay in town, at least for a while. The city could wait. I started volunteering at the community center, reading stories to kids on weekends. It made me feel close to her again, like her kindness had found its way through me. I fixed up the garden, too. The daisies bloomed that spring, bright, full, reaching for the sun. Every morning, I'd pick one and place it next to her photo. And then, one morning, something changed. I woke up and realized I wasn't crying anymore when I thought of her. Instead, I smiled. Grief had softened into gratitude. One afternoon, I took a long walk down the same country road I used to walk as a child. The trees looked older, the fence paint chipped, but the air smelled the same, like grass and rain and memories. At the end of the road, I saw the swing Dad had built all those years ago. It was broken, one chain rusted, swaying gently in the wind. I sat down anyway. The seat creaked. The wind brushed my hair, and I whispered, "I'm home, Dad. I'm home." And for the first time, I felt peace. It's been almost a year now since Mom passed. Sometimes I still talk to her, out loud, in the kitchen, when I'm cooking her recipes. Maybe that sounds silly, but it helps. And every night, before I go to bed, I turn on the porch light. Not because I'm waiting for someone to come home, but because I finally understand what it means to be home. Love isn't a place you live in. It's the people who teach you how to stay soft in a hard world. Before I end my story, there's something I want to say to anyone listening. If you have someone waiting for your call, someone who loves you quietly from afar, don't wait for the right moment. There's never a perfect time. There's just now. Call them. Visit them. Say the things you'll wish you had said, because sometimes love doesn't fade. It just waits for us to come home.